The gunshot split the evening air like thunder, sending a flock of ravens scattering from the rooftops of Silver Creek. Zara Griffith clutched her 5-year-old son tighter to her chest, pressing herself against the rough-hewn wall of her small home at the edge of town. Outside, angry voices swelled like a gathering storm. "I ain't asking again, Mrs. Griffith. Send that boy out or we're coming in." The voice belonged to Harold Thornton, owner of the town's largest cattle operation and, since yesterday, father to a son killed in what everyone was calling murder. Zara's hands trembled as she stroked her son's dark hair. "Hush now, Samuel," she whispered, though the boy hadn't made a sound. Terror had robbed him of speech since they'd come pounding on her door at sunset. "Mama," he finally whimpered, "are they gonna hurt us like they hurt Papa?" The question stabbed at her heart. Her husband Thomas had been dead 3 months now, taken by fever after a hard winter. She was all Samuel had left in this world, and she'd die before she'd let them take him. "Your boy pushed my Jeremiah off that bridge, and now my son's dead," Thornton bellowed. "The law says he answers for it. He's 5 years old," Zara shouted back through the door, finding courage in maternal fury. It was an accident. They were playing another gunshot, closer this time, cutting her plea short. Someone in the mob whooped. The sound of breaking glass came from her kitchen window. "Samuel," she whispered urgently, "go to the cellar. Remember the hiding spot Papa showed you? Go there now and don't come out until I call you." The boy's eyes, wide with understanding beyond his years, met hers. He nodded once and slipped away to the trapdoor behind the pantry. Zara took a deep breath, grabbed her husband's old shotgun from above the mantel, and moved toward the door. She knew the weapon was unloaded. She'd sold the shells weeks ago to buy medicine, but they didn't know that. Just as her hand touched the latch, the thundering of hooves cut through the cacophony of angry voices. The mob fell eerily silent. "That's far enough, Thornton." The voice was low, steady as stone, and unmistakable. It belonged to Xavier Pierce. Zara pressed her eye to the crack in the door. Through the narrow opening, she could see the silhouette of a man on horseback, blocking the path to her porch. The setting sun cast his shadow long across the dirt yard, making him appear larger than life. Pierce had arrived in Silver Creek only 6 months ago, a drifter with eyes that had seen too much and said too little. He kept to himself, taking odd jobs at the livery stable, drinking alone at the saloon, and watching. Always watching, as if measuring the town against some invisible standard. Few knew his story. Whispers said he'd once ridden with rangers in Texas. Others claimed he'd been a bounty hunter who'd grown tired of death. "This ain't your business, Pierce," Thornton spat. "That woman's boy killed my son, 16 men against a widow and her child." Xavier's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "That how justice works in Silver Creek now? The marshal's 3 days' ride away," someone from the crowd called out. "We're doing what needs doing." Zara held her breath as Xavier dismounted, his movements unhurried. His dark coat hung open, revealing the gleam of a revolver holstered at his hip. The crowd shifted nervously. "That boy in there is 5 years old," Xavier said, his voice somehow both quiet and carrying to every ear. "Your boys were playing on that bridge. It was an accident, Thornton. Even your wife said as much before you shouted her down." A murmur rippled through the gathering. "You calling me a liar?" Thornton stepped forward, his hand hovering near his own pistol. "I'm saying grief's got you looking for someone to punish," Xavier replied, not moving an inch. "And that ain't justice, that's vengeance." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Zara's fingers whitened around the shotgun, her heart hammering so loud she was certain they must all hear it. "Step aside, Pierce," Thornton warned, "or we'll go through you." Something changed in Xavier's stance, a subtle shift that seemed to make the air around him dangerous. "You can try." For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Thornton's hand twitched toward his gun. Xavier's draw was so swift it seemed like sorcery. His revolver appeared in his hand as if conjured, aimed squarely at Thornton's chest. He hadn't fired, but the threat was clear as crystal. "First man makes a move dies where he stands," Xavier stated calmly. "Second man too, maybe the third. How many of you want to test those odds?" Thornton's face twisted with fury, but his hand moved away from his weapon. This town stands with me, Pierce. You're one man. Am I? The question hung in the air as the door to the saloon across the street swung open. Hiram Johnson, the elderly barkeep, stepped out with a scattergun in his weathered hands. From the general store came Eliza Warren, the stern widow who'd run the place since her husband died in '67, a rifle held with surprising confidence. One by one, other doors opened. Not everyone in town, not even most, but enough to make Thornton's mob glance uneasily at each other. You got no right, Thornton snarled. Neither do you. Xavier's gun remained steady. Now, here's what happens next. You all go home. Tomorrow at noon, we'll have a town meeting. We'll talk this through like civilized folk. If you want to bring charges against the boy, you can make your case to the marshal when he returns. And if I say no, then you draw, and we find out if your cause is worth dying for. Something passed between the two men, a recognition, perhaps, that neither truly wanted blood spilled this night. Finally, Thornton stepped back. This ain't over, he growled. No, Xavier agreed, but it's over for tonight. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, breaking apart into muttering pairs and trios. A few cast resentful looks toward Zara's house, but none approached. Thornton was the last to leave, backing away with hatred burning in his eyes. When they had gone, Xavier turned toward the house. Mrs. Griffith. It's safe to come out now. Zara hesitated, then unbarred her door. She stood in the doorway, shotgun still clutched in her trembling hands. I didn't ask for your help, she said, though gratitude and relief warred with her pride. A ghost of a smile touched Xavier's lips. No, madam, you didn't. Why did you do it? You don't even know us. Xavier's eyes green as summer grass met hers. Maybe this town needs reminding what it stands for. He looked at the unloaded shotgun in her hands and added more softly, and maybe no one should face a mob alone. Something passed between them, then a current of understanding that made Zara suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance, the wild tangle of her auburn hair, the smudge of dirt on her cheek. Thank you, she said simply, lowering the shotgun. Xavier nodded once. They'll be back, or at least Thornton will. Grief makes men dangerous. I know. Zara glanced over her shoulder toward the cellar where Samuel hid. But we'll be gone by morning. I have family in Colorado territory. That's a hard journey for a woman and child alone. We've faced harder. Xavier studied her for a long moment. I've got business in Denver myself. Was planning to head that way end of the week. The offer in his words remained unspoken but clear. Before Zara could respond, little Samuel emerged from his hiding place, his small face appearing in the doorway beside her. His eyes, so like his father's, were solemn as they took in the stranger on their porch. Are you an angel? The boy asked quietly. Xavier looked startled, then let out a short laugh that seemed to surprise even himself. No, son, far from it. But you saved us, Samuel persisted. Papa said angels watch over us. Something flickered across Xavier's face, pain or memory. Zara couldn't tell which. He crouched down to the boy's level. I'm just a man passing through, he said gently, but I'll make sure you and your mama get where you're going safe. Samuel considered this, then nodded gravely, accepting the explanation with a child's simple faith. Zara found herself studying Xavier's face, the lines etched by sun and hardship, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way his expression softened when he spoke to her son. This man had stood between death and her door tonight, a stranger with no cause to risk himself for them. We'll be ready at first light, she said finally, if your offer still stands. Xavier rose to his full height again, touching the brim of his hat. I'll be here. He turned to go, then paused. Bar your door, Mrs. Griffith, and if anyone comes knocking before morning, fire that shotgun into the air. Empty or not, I'll hear it. With that, he melted into the gathering darkness, leaving Zara to wonder what kind of man would stand alone against a mob for people he barely knew and why. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt something stir in her heart besides grief. The night passed without incident, though Zara slept little, sitting vigilant with the shotgun across her lap. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, she had packed their few possessions: clothing, Thomas's pocket watch, the family Bible, and the small leather pouch containing the meager savings she'd managed to hide away. Samuel woke with the sun. his eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. The terror of the previous night seemed to have been replaced by excitement at the prospect of adventure. "Will Mr. Pierce have a big horse?" he asked as Zara helped him dress. "Will I get to ride it?" "I don't know, love," Zara replied, smoothing his collar. "But we must be grateful for his help and not be a burden." A soft knock at the door made them both freeze. Zara positioned Samuel behind her and approached cautiously. "Mrs. Griffith, it's Pierce." Relief flooded through her as she unbarred the door. Xavier stood on her porch, looking as though he'd had no more sleep than she had. Behind him were two horses, his own dark stallion and a gentle-looking mare with a pack saddle. "Found you some transportation," he said by way of greeting. "Mrs. Warren was looking to sell this one anyway." "Said to consider it a parting gift." Zara blinked in surprise. "I can't accept. You can settle up with her when you're established in Colorado," Xavier cut in. "She's a businesswoman, not a charity." Zara nodded, understanding the fiction that preserved her dignity. "We're ready," she said. "Just need to lock up." Xavier's gaze swept over the small homestead. Planning to come back someday, Zara looked at the home she and Thomas had built, where they'd welcomed their son into the world, where they'd dreamed of a future now turned to ash. "No," she said softly. "There's nothing for us here now." "Then don't bother with the lock," Xavier replied. He helped load their belongings onto the mare, then lifted Samuel onto his own horse, much to the boy's delight. They set out as the town was just beginning to stir, taking the back trail that would lead them north without passing through Silver Creek proper. The morning air was crisp, fragrant with sage and pine, and for the first time in months, Zara felt something like hope unfurling in her chest. They had ridden perhaps 2 miles when Xavier suddenly reined in, his posture alert. "Riders coming," he said quietly. 4, maybe 5, Zara's heart sank. "Thornton," Xavier nodded grimly. "Get off the trail, take the boy into those trees." "What about you?" His eyes met hers, steady and determined. "I'll handle it." "They'll kill you." A humorless smile touched his lips. "Not the first time I've heard that." He dismounted and handed her the reins to both horses. "Go, I'll find you." Something made Zara reach out and grasp his arm. "Why are you doing this? You could ride away. This isn't your fight." For a moment the mask slipped and she glimpsed something raw beneath a wound that had never properly healed. "Maybe it should have been, once upon a time," he said quietly. "Go on now." Reluctantly, Zara led the horses off the trail, lifting Samuel down and tethering them in a copse of pines. From their position, they could see Xavier standing alone on the trail, waiting as the riders appeared around the bend. Thornton led the group, his face set in hard lines of hatred. 4 men flanked him, all armed. "Figured you'd try to sneak her out," Thornton called as they reined in. "Where is she?" "Gone," Xavier replied simply. "Let it be, Thornton. You buried your boy yesterday. Don't make more graves today. That woman's brat pushed my son off that bridge." "Witnesses saw it." "The witnesses saw 2 boys playing," Xavier corrected. "Your Jeremiah was 12 years old, nearly a man. Samuel Griffith is 5. Are you telling me a 5-year-old deliberately murdered a boy twice his size?" Thornton's jaw worked as he struggled for words. "It doesn't matter." The law says nothing about lynch mobs," Xavier cut in. "Your boy's death was a tragedy, Thornton, but ruining more lives won't bring him back." One of Thornton's men shifted nervously in his saddle. "Harold, maybe we should wait for the marshal." "Shut up," Thornton snapped. His hand dropped to his holster. "I won't ask again. Pierce, where's the woman and the boy?" Xavier's stance changed subtly, the same deadly readiness Zara had witnessed the night before. "You want them, you come through me." From her hiding place, Zara held her breath. She'd seen the speed of Xavier's draw, but 5 against 1 were impossible odds, no matter how fast he was. Thornton's face contorted with fury. "So be it." His hand twitched toward his gun. Before he could clear leather, a rifle shot cracked through the morning air. Dirt exploded near Thornton's horse, making the animal rear in panic. "That's enough," the commanding voice came from behind Xavier. Zara strained to see past the confrontation and was shocked to recognize Marshal Ellis Perkins, whom everyone had believed was days away. Behind him rode 6 deputies, all with rifles at the ready. Marshall, Thornton stammered. You don't understand, I understand plenty, Perkins interrupted, urging his horse forward until he was beside Xavier. Got word last night about what was brewing here, rode straight through. His steely gaze swept over Thornton's party. Looks to me like I'm interrupting an attempted murder. We're seeking justice for my boy. Justice comes from the law, not the barrel of a gun, Perkins retorted. Now all of you, throw your weapons down or my men will open fire. For a tense moment, Thornton seemed to consider resistance. Then, with a curse, he unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall to the ground. His men followed suit. Mrs. Griffith, the marshal called out, if you're nearby, you can come out now. No one's going to harm you or your boy. Zara hesitated, then stepped from the trees, leading Samuel by the hand. The child pressed against her skirts, wide-eyed but unafraid. Marshal, she acknowledged warily. Madam, Perkins nodded. I'm sorry about this business. I've already spoken with several witnesses in town. What happened at the bridge was a tragic accident, not murder. That's a lie, Thornton shouted. Even your wife says differently, Harold, Perkins said firmly. She told me Jeremiah was showing off, walking on the railing. The little Griffith boy was just watching. He might have startled him, but it wasn't intentional. Thornton's face crumpled, grief finally breaking through his rage. My boy is dead, he said, his voice cracking. Yes, Perkins agreed more gently. And I'm sorry for that, but more deaths won't change it, he gestured to his deputies. Take these men back to town. They can cool off in the cells until they remember how civilized folk behave. As the deputies rounded up Thornton and his men, Perkins turned to Xavier and Zara. You folks all right, Xavier nodded. We're fine, Marshal, heading to Colorado territory. Perkins studied them thoughtfully. Mrs. Griffith, I can't tell you what to do, but running might not be necessary now. This town owes you an apology, not exile. Zara lifted her chin. With respect, Marshal, I've seen the true face of Silver Creek. I don't care to look upon it again. The marshal sighed but nodded in understanding. Fair enough. He turned to Xavier. You're a good man, Pierce. Not many would stand alone against a mob. A shadow passed over Xavier's features. I've been on the wrong side of a mob before, he said quietly. Never again. Something in his tone made Zara glance at him sharply, but Xavier's expression had already closed off, unreadable once more. As the marshal escorted Thornton's party back toward town, Xavier helped Zara and Samuel remount. They continued northward in silence for some time, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Samuel who finally broke the quiet. Mr. Pierce, he asked from his perch in front of Xavier, are you scared of anything? The unexpected question seemed to catch Xavier off guard. A faint smile touched his lips. Everyone's scared of something, son. What are you scared of? Xavier was quiet for so long that Zara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, failing those who need me, making the same mistakes twice. Samuel considered this with childish seriousness. I'm scared of the dark sometimes, and spiders. Those are reasonable fears, Xavier replied gravely. Spiders have too many legs. Samuel giggled, a sound so unexpected and bright that Zara felt tears spring to her eyes. It had been months since she'd heard her son laugh like that. They made camp that night beside a creek, beneath a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch. After Samuel had fallen asleep, wrapped in blankets near the fire, Zara found Xavier sitting on a fallen log at the edge of their campsite, staring out into the darkness. He likes you, she said softly, settling beside him. He hasn't taken to anyone like that since his father died. Xavier glanced at her. He's a good boy, smart too. Yes. Zara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. You've been kind to us, Mr. Pierce. Kinder than we had any right to expect from a stranger. Xavier, he corrected, and kindness doesn't need to be earned, Mrs. Griffith. Zara, she returned, a small smile playing at her lips, and perhaps not, but courage does and loyalty, you showed both. He looked away, discomfort evident in the set of his shoulders. I just did what needed doing. What did you mean earlier, she asked carefully, about being on the wrong side of a mob before? The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low and rough. I had a family once, wife, daughter, little place in Kansas back in '66. Zara's heart constricted, somehow already knowing where this story led. There was a drifter came through town, Xavier continued. Things started going missing. Then a little girl disappeared. They found her body in the creek, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Town went mad with rage, decided the drifter had done it, formed a mob, dragged him from the jail, and you were part of it, Zara whispered. Xavier nodded once, a sharp, pained movement. I didn't stop them, stood by while they strung him up. His eyes, when they met hers, were haunted. Week later, they caught the real killer, local man, respectable, had been doing it for years. Zara reached out, covering his clenched fist with her hand. It wasn't your fault. I knew it was wrong, he said flatly. Knew it while it was happening, but I was afraid to stand alone against the town. His jaw tightened. Never again. Understanding bloomed in Zara's heart why this solitary, taciturn man had risked everything for her and Samuel. Not just decency or courage, but atonement. What happened to your family? She asked gently. Sarah, my wife, she couldn't look at me the same after. Said I wasn't the man she thought I was. The words emerged as if each one was being torn from him. She took our daughter and went back east to her people. I headed west. I'm sorry, Xavier shrugged, though the casual gesture couldn't disguise the deep pain beneath. It was a long time ago. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek's gentle murmur and the pop of the dying fire. Zara found herself studying his profile, strong, weathered, bearing the marks of a decade's hard living. Yet there was gentleness there too, in the way he'd spoken to Samuel, in his patient handling of the horses, in the careful distance he kept from her, respecting her grief and her boundaries. You're a good man, Xavier Pierce, she said finally. Whatever mistakes you've made, you've more than paid for them. He turned to look at her then, really look at her, perhaps for the first time. Zara was suddenly acutely aware of how close they sat, of the warmth of his hand beneath hers, of the way the firelight caught in his eyes. You remind me of her sometimes, he said quietly. My Sarah, the way you stand your ground, the fierceness when it comes to protecting your boy. The comparison should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow it didn't. What was she like? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Strong. Stubborn as the day is long, could grow anything in that Kansas soil, had the greenest thumb I ever saw. The smile faded. She deserved better than I gave her. Or perhaps, Zara suggested softly, she didn't understand that good men can make mistakes in moments of fear and confusion. She thought of her own Thomas, a gentle soul who nonetheless had his flaws. No one is just one thing, Xavier. We're all a tapestry of our choices, the good and the bad. He looked at her with something like wonder, as if she'd voiced a truth he'd never allowed himself to consider. Slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. You should get some rest, he said, his voice rough. Long ride tomorrow. Zara nodded and stood, but she didn't immediately return to the fire. Instead, she squeezed his hand once, letting the touch linger. Thank you for telling me, he nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Good night, Zara. Good night, Xavier. As she settled into her blankets beside Samuel, Zara found herself contemplating the strange turns life could take. 3 days ago, she had been a widow barely scraping by in a town that had turned against her. Now she was heading toward a new life, guided by a man whose broken pieces somehow seemed to fit alongside her own. It was too soon for such thoughts, she knew. Her grief for Thomas was still fresh, her future uncertain. And yet, for the first time since her husband's death, she felt a spark of possibility, of life beyond mere survival. With that comforting thought, she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. The journey to Colorado Territory took 2 weeks, through landscapes that changed from the familiar sage-dotted plains to dramatic mountains that seemed to scrape the very sky. Samuel blossomed during the travel, his nightmares receding, replaced by endless questions about everything they encountered from jackrabbits to distant peaks. Xavier proved to be a patient teacher, explaining tracks and weather signs, showing the boy how to build a proper fire, telling stories of the land they traversed. Somewhere along the way, the formal Mr. Pierce gave way to Xavier, spoken with increasing affection. For Zara, The journey became a strange liminal space, neither the life she'd left behind nor yet the new one ahead. In this in-between time, she found herself watching Xavier with growing awareness, noting the way the sun bronzed his skin, how his rare smiles transformed his entire face, the gentleness of his calloused hands as he helped her down from her horse each evening. They spoke often during the quiet hours after Samuel slept, sharing stories of their lives before. Xavier told her of his years in Texas, of the beauty of the hill country and the horrors of the war. She shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with Thomas, their dreams for the homestead they'd built. Gradually, the weight of their respective pasts seemed to lighten, worn smooth like river stones by the current of shared understanding. It was 3 days from Denver when everything changed. They had made camp in a sheltered valley, a place of unexpected beauty with a clear stream and wildflowers carpeting the meadow. Samuel had worn himself out exploring and fell asleep almost immediately after dinner, leaving Zara and Xavier sitting by the fire as twilight deepened into night. "Your sister will be surprised to see you," Xavier remarked, stoking the flames. "Have you told her we're coming?" Zara shook her head. "No way to send word, but Emma has a big heart and a bigger house. She's been asking me to come since Thomas died." "Will you stay there permanently?" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "Emma's husband owns a mercantile in Denver. He's offered me work there." She paused, studying Xavier's expression in the firelight. "What about you? What takes you to Denver?" He shrugged. "No particular purpose, just seemed as good a direction as any." The words hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Their journey would end soon, and with it, whatever this undefined connection between them had become. "You could stay," Zara said impulsively. "Denver's a growing city. I'm sure there'd be work for a man with your skills." Xavier's gaze lifted to meet hers, a question in his eyes. "What skills would those be? You're good with horses, good with your hands." Zara felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Good with Samuel." "Zara," he said, her name like a caress in his low voice, "are you asking me to stay for Samuel's sake or for yours?" The directness of the question took her breath away. In the past 2 weeks, they had circled each other carefully, respecting boundaries neither had explicitly defined. Now he had crossed that invisible line, forcing her to confront feelings she'd been too cautious to name. "Both," she answered honestly. "He needs a man in his life, and she faltered, uncertain how to proceed. Xavier moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool mountain air. "And you?" he prompted gently. Zara looked up into his face, at the lines etched by sun and hardship, at eyes that had seen both beauty and terrible darkness. "I never expected to feel this way again," she whispered. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of me died with him." Xavier's hand rose, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I know," he said simply, and he did know, she realized. He understood loss in a way few others could, not just the grief of death, but the particular ache of a life torn asunder, of being forced to rebuild from scattered pieces. "I don't want you to go," she admitted, the words both frightening and liberating, "but I don't know if I'm ready for." "What that might mean?" Xavier nodded, his hand falling away from her face. "I understand." "No," Zara caught his hand, surprising herself with her boldness. "I don't mean I want you to leave. I mean I need time, patience." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it. "Time I can give." "Patience too." His fingers tightened around hers. "I've been wandering a long time, Zara. Found I don't much care for it anymore." Something warm unfurled in her chest, like a flower turning toward the sun. "Then stay," she whispered. "See where this leads." In the flickering light of the fire, Xavier leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Zara held her ground, her heart thundering in her chest as his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a breath. She felt herself trembling, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions, grief for what she had lost, fear of this new vulnerability, and beneath it all, a current of joy so unexpected it brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I'll stay," he promised. "For as long as you'll have me." 3 days later, they crested a rise and saw Denver spread below them, a bustling outpost of civilization nestled against the dramatic backdrop of the Rockies. Zara felt a curious mix of excitement and trepidation as they descended toward the city. Emma's welcome was every bit as warm as Zara had predicted. Her sister, golden-haired and round-faced where Zara was auburn and angular, embraced her with tears streaming down her cheeks, then immediately swooped Samuel into her arms, exclaiming over how he'd grown. Her husband James, a prosperous-looking man with kind eyes, shook Xavier's hand firmly. "Any man who'd stand between a mob and this family is welcome in our home," he declared after hearing their story. "We've got plenty of room, and I could use help at the store if you're looking for work." And so they settled into a new rhythm. Xavier took a position at James's mercantile, proving to have an unexpected head for business. Zara helped Emma with her growing brood of children, 4 cousins for Samuel to play with. They lived in Emma's large house on the edge of town, Xavier in a room above the carriage house, Zara and Samuel in the guest quarters. The arrangement gave them the space Zara had asked for, time to learn each other in this new context of stability rather than danger and travel. They took walks together on Sundays, sometimes with Samuel, sometimes alone. Xavier taught the boy to fish in the creek that ran behind the property. Zara taught him to read from her family Bible in the evenings. Weeks stretched into months. Summer cooled into autumn, painting the surrounding mountains with a riot of color. Denver was different from Silver Creek, larger, more diverse, less prone to the insularity that had turned a tragedy into a witch hunt. Here, Samuel thrived, his nightmares fading, his laughter returning. It was a crisp October day when Xavier took Zara riding into the foothills, leaving Samuel happily engaged in helping Emma bake pies for the harvest festival. They stopped in a meadow overlooking the city, the same place where they had first glimpsed Denver months before, happy. Xavier asked as they spread a blanket beneath an aspen tree, its golden leaves dancing in the light breeze. Zara considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I am. Samuel certainly is." Xavier nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He's a fine boy." "You've done well by him, Zara." "We have," she corrected gently. "He adores you." A smile touched Xavier's lips. "The feeling is mutual." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching an eagle circle lazily overhead. Zara found herself studying Xavier's profile, the strength of his jaw, the way the mountain air had put color in his formerly weathered cheeks, the silver just beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples. He looked younger than he had that night in Silver Creek, as if some of the weight he'd carried had been set down along the way. "I've been thinking," he said finally, turning to face her. "About the future." Zara's heart quickened. "Oh, James offered to sell me a partnership in the store." Xavier's eyes held her steadily. "I've saved most of what I've earned these past months, could make the first payment, work off the rest over time." "That's wonderful," Zara said, genuinely pleased. "You've earned his trust. It would mean staying in Denver, permanently." She nodded, understanding the question behind his statement. "Is that what you want?" "Depends." Xavier reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Zara, I know you said you needed time. I've tried to give you that. But I need to know if there's a chance for us, for something more than friendship." Zara looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her paler complexion. She thought of Thomas, of the love they'd shared, of the grief that had nearly consumed her after his death. That grief wasn't gone, it had simply changed shape, become something she could carry without being crushed by its weight, and in its place, something new had grown. Not a replacement, never that, but a different love, no less real for being unexpected. "Yes," she said softly, lifting her gaze to meet his. "More than a chance, Xavier, a certainty." The hope that bloomed in his eyes made her breath catch. "I don't have much to offer," he said roughly. "No land, no fortune, just myself, whatever that's worth." "It's worth everything," Zara replied, meaning it with her whole heart. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar that bisected his eyebrow. "You stood alone against a mob for us when you had no reason to. You've been patient and kind, never pushing. You've given Samuel back his laughter." Her voice wavered. "How could I not love you for that?" It was the first time either of them had spoken the word, and it hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful at once. Xavier's hand came up to cover hers. "I love you too," he said, the words sounding almost rusty, as if long unused. "Have since that night in Silver Creek, I think, though I was too stubborn to admit it." Zara laughed softly. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both too wary to reach for happiness when it's right in front of us." "Not anymore," Xavier said firmly. From his pocket he withdrew a simple gold band. "I had this made last week, wasn't sure when I'd find the courage to give it to you." His eyes searched hers. "Zara Griffith, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, joyful this time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, not perfect, perhaps, but built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared experiences, and the kind of love that grows stronger for having been tested by fire. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Denver, met with general delight, particularly from Emma, who claimed she'd seen it coming from the moment they'd arrived. Samuel's reaction, however, was the one that mattered most. "Does this mean Xavier will be my papa now?" he asked when they told him. Zara knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. "He'll be your stepfather," she explained gently. "Your papa will always be your papa, even though he's in heaven, but Xavier loves you very much, and he'll be here to take care of us both." Samuel considered this with solemn attention, then he looked up at Xavier. "Will you teach me to shoot a gun like yours?" Xavier's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "When you're older," he promised, "much older." This seemed to satisfy the boy, who nodded once, then asked if he could go play with his cousins. The matter settled in his mind. They were married a month later in the small church on the edge of town, with Emma and James standing as witnesses and Samuel proudly bearing the rings. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, a testament to new beginnings and second chances. As winter settled over Denver, bringing with it snow that transformed the mountains into a wonderland of white, Xavier, Zara, and Samuel moved into a modest house of their own, not far from Emma's. It wasn't grand, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs, a place to build the future they'd once thought impossible. One evening, as snow fell gently outside the windows, Zara sat at the kitchen table writing a letter. Xavier entered quietly, setting a cup of tea beside her. "What's that?" he asked, nodding at the paper. "A letter to Silver Creek," Zara replied. "To Marshall Perkins." Xavier raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What for?" Zara looked up at him, her expression serene. "To thank him, and to let him know we're well." She hesitated, then added, "And to ask after Thornton and his wife. It's been on my mind lately, wondering how they're faring after losing their son." Xavier studied her face, a mix of wonder and admiration in his eyes. "You're a remarkable woman, Zara Pierce." She smiled at the sound of her new name. Not remarkable, just finally at peace. She took his hand, drawing him down to sit beside her. "That night in Silver Creek, when you stood between the mob and us, you didn't just save our lives. You showed a town consumed by hatred that there was another way." Xavier shook his head. "I doubt one night changed much. Perhaps not for everyone," Zara acknowledged, "but for some. Hiram Johnson, Eliza Warren, the others who stood with you, they'll remember. And maybe next time hatred comes to their door, they'll stand against it too." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, absorbing her words. Then he leaned forward to kiss her softly. "You make me want to be a better man," he murmured against her lips. "You already are," she whispered back. "You always were." Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Denver in a blanket of pristine white. Inside their small home, Xavier and Zara held each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and for the mercy both given and received that had made their love possible. In the bedroom down the hall, Samuel slept peacefully, no longer haunted by nightmares of angry voices and threatening shadows. The family that had seemed broken beyond repair had found wholeness again, not by forgetting the past, but by building something new from its lessons, a future founded on forgiveness, courage, and the quiet strength of love that persists even in the darkest of nights.